Hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Applying the 7 Steps of Data Analysis to Produce a Quantitative Research Study. I'm William Bannon of Stats Whisperer, bringing you the presentation. All right, the first things first. So, let's set the tone of our program right away. So, our tone would say that learning quantitative data analysis can be simple and straightforward. No need for stress, no need for complexity. There are a few simple rules that make data analysis very manageable, and we are going to review them in this program. Second, yes, quantitative data analysis can be very engaging and enjoyable. So once you learn these rules and begin to apply them, you'll find you're very engaged, and before you know it, you're very likely to enjoy applying them. You have to take my word for that right now, but it'll be evident very shortly. All right, so how are we going to make it engaging and enjoyable? Our learning strategy. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but often what makes learning click is relating what we know already to what we're learning, right? And that's going to be our strategy within this webinar. You'll see that data analysis, the process, is like many other processes that you already know. So once you relate what you know to data analysis, it'll click. So what we're reviewing in this presentation today. First, we're going to review the course objective. Second, we're going to discuss how a quantitative study will actually be your vehicle for learning quantitative data analysis. Then the TS SOTA, that stands for the 7 Steps of Data Analysis textbook, that we're going to learn part 1, the introduction, then part 2, a model for conducting statistical research, and then we'll provide an overview of parts 3 through 7. Now, the whole course objective, to sum up in one sentence, is to present how to conduct a quantitative research study in a series of 7 clear, logical, and definitive steps. Okay, so the class operates under the belief that learning isn't just a product of reading, right? So it's not just knowledge, it's also doing, it's applying the knowledge. If we wanted to state that more eloquently, through Aristotle, he would say, for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. So this has been a technique going on for thousands of years. For example, if you wanted to learn how to swim, you could do as the lady in the photo on the right is doing and read a book about swimming, so you could learn a bit about it. But as the people on the left are doing, you would also learn much more by actually jumping in the water and applying the learning. So, in our program, our learning will not just study quantitative research and statistics, but we'll actually do a full quantitative study. So, as we promised, your vehicle for learning research, your own quantitative study. So, simultaneously in this program, you're going to learn and apply the materials to conduct your own quantitative study. Right? You'll be supported through a description of all the how-to facts about data analysis. Right? So everything you need to know will be contained within. Additionally, you'll have sample studies that will help you follow along how to plug in your variables. Right? So the sample studies are templates where you could plug in your variables and follow along in the study. Right? So part 1 of our textbook, the 7 Steps of Data Analysis. So the text is written from the point of view of the non-statistician who needs to conduct a quantitative study. Okay, so for this person, knowing the essentials is the key, right? So there are a few basic rules in quantitative data analysis that if you know, they'll carry you right along in implementing your study. So our mission is to name and explain each of these essentials. So the first thing we might discuss is, what exactly is data analysis? Some people might just say it's statistics, right? But statistics is only one component, right? There are rules and procedures also in addition to the statistical tests, right? So if we were to state it scientifically, we could say data analysis is a series of statistical tests and procedures applied in a stepwise progression in order to examine a data set, which that might be sort of alienating, but that is what it is. Right? But we could actually make it more user-friendly for an introduction to data analysis, right? And say we could classify data analysis as having three components, right? And you could familiarize yourself with these three components through considering the process of making a cake. Okay, so you'll see that both making a cake and performing data analysis have the equivalent of a recipe, ingredients, and utensils. Now seriously, you could consider to make a cake, you need a recipe, which is a list of steps to follow to produce the cake. For example, the steps often include first preheat the oven, second grease the pan, and so on. Number two, you need ingredients, right, to comprise the cake: butter, flour, sugar, eggs. And third, you need the utensils to combine the cake ingredients, such as a hand mixer to combine the cream and sugar and butter all together. Now, data analysis is pretty much the same thing. First, you need a recipe to produce not a cake, but you need a recipe to produce a study. And that's what the 7 steps of data analysis are. They're a series of steps followed in order that will produce a study, just like a recipe produces a cake. Second, in a quantitative study, you also need ingredients, right? So the ingredients in the study are the data, right? For example, if we were to do a study examining how happiness might differ among people that live with a dog or a cat, right? Those are the ingredients for the study. Happiness, right, is one data point. And second, do you live with a dog or a cat? So those are the ingredients for the study. Now, if you have ingredients for a cake and you leave them sitting on the counter, they're not going to make the cake. And that's the same thing with data analysis. If you have the ingredients for a study, right, that's not the study itself. You need something to combine the ingredients, right? So number 3, for a quantitative study, you need the utensils to combine and relate the ingredients, just like the hand mixer for a cake. But for data analysis, it's the statistical tests. So to compare happiness with, if you live with a dog or a cat and see who's happier, right, you'll use a statistical test, right? So you need the same 3 elements for each. Now, as we view these components, number 2 sticks out, right? And why? Component number 2, the data. Why? Because you'll see in the textbook that it discusses the 7 steps of data analysis very well, and then it also discusses component 3 very well, the statistical tests, right? But where do you get component 2, the data, right? Where can you get data to use to form your own study? That's a little bit of a mystery. So let's go through that. There are generally 2 sources and types of data. First, primary, and then secondary data. And you'll see the choice, right, whether you choose primary or secondary, has major implications for your quantitative research study, right? Just like think about the quality of the ingredients in a cake make a big difference on how the cake comes out. So the type of data you use make a big difference in how your study turns out. So primary data are data, right? Original data. They're also called original data. Primary data are original data observed or collected directly from first-hand experience. In other words, they're data gathered by the researcher for his or her study, right? So you may ask, how can you generate primary data for your quantitative data analysis study? There are several ways. One way might be to consider gathering primary data as a class. And it might go in these steps, right? So the class may select a topic. For example, you may wonder if age, a person's age, relates to their ratings of TV quality. Right? Do younger or older study participants have different opinions of the quality of television? Right? So, 2, the class may create a survey, and we'll see that on the next slide, where they rate the quality of the TV and they ask a person's age, as indiscreet as that is at times. So, number 3, each student might survey 3 or 5 people outside of class, and 4, the students return to class, the next class, and enter the data in their own separate SPSS databases, and the professor may merge the files to create one database to work from. Now keep in mind, number 5, if data on several topics are gathered, right, such as gender, education, and so on, there could be multiple research questions, as do ratings of television differ by gender? Do they differ by education? As well as do they differ by age? Right? And that might be what the survey looks like, a short little survey. Right? If you were to administer it to 3 to 5 people, it wouldn't take a long time. Right? So first, tell us your age. Second, rate the television, right? Quality. And then 3, tell us your gender. 4, tell us your level of education. Now here's your big chance. You need to ponder. Have you ever wondered about a certain relationship all your life? Is A related to B, right? So if you're selecting a topic here, this might be your big chance to have that burning question answered. Now, secondary data, utilizing secondary data. That's our second data source, right? So alternately, we could use secondary data. Now, secondary data are data that are already collected by someone else, right? Now, I've always considered the term as not really representative of what secondary data are. It's called secondary, but it's gathered by somebody else. So you could also give it the term OPD. There was a song back in 1992, and the tagline said, "Are you down with OPP?" Right? And yes, they did say, "Yeah, you know me." That's none of our concern. So the OPD refers to other people's data. So that's a little more descriptive of what secondary data are. So you can still call them secondary data, but remember, it's other people's data that we're using for our study. Right? So getting down with OPD, utilizing secondary data. Okay, first, how do you do that? First, you access a secondary data set, such as the SPSS data set that accompanies this presentation. Right? Number 2, you look at the list of variables. Right? So from the list of variables, you create either a class or individual topics. Right? For example, is happiness related to living with a dog or a cat? Right? As is illustrated in the textbook. Third, you can still practice data entry because the surveys are still available that the database is based upon, so you could enter those and create a replica of that database. Right? And number 4, the many surveys entered by the students in separate databases can be merged to create one overall database for the study. It's rather simple. Okay? And there's the list of items in the secondary database, right? So 1, highest level of education, 2, personal income, and so on. Important to pay attention, number 6, those are called composite items, which we'll address later. That's where all the items are combined, right, to create one overall score. And those 6A through 6E are combined to create one multi-dimensional score reflecting happiness. All right, a little course disclaimer here. All right, now it's important to realize that this SPSS database, right, was created for teaching purposes. Right, the data are not derivative of actual study participants. Right, they were just created for teaching purposes. Right, so One time a student actually suggested that Purina funded this study because it involves a dog and a cat related to people's happiness. However, it's important to keep in mind that this database was created without outside pet food brand funding. Purina is not a funder. Thank you. All right, primary versus secondary data. So this is our lesson number 1, right, with quantitative research, right? Using primary and secondary data involves different demands and benefits, right? Secondary data are available immediately, right? So we can open the database and do an analysis right now, but we don't have any control over the contents, as in we can't suggest what the data to gather because it's already gathered, right? So we can only use what's there already. So that's a limitation, right? Many times you'll have to use proxy variables that don't reflect what you want, but quasi relate to what you want, right? Now, next, gathering primary data is laborious, right? It takes a lot of work, but you can control what data are gathered. And so there's a trade-off for each. So realizing the issues, benefits, and trade-offs involved in primary and secondary data sources is an important lesson, not just for this study now, but research and beyond. All right, so in preparation for the next class, you must think like a researcher. Okay, you must ponder these questions. Right, you have to decide: do you recommend one study shared by the class or individual projects, and why? And what study topics and research questions do you suggest, and why? And do you suggest using primary or secondary data sources, and why? Right? So by the next class, those decisions will be made. And so individual studies, class studies, right? Finalize the selection of the research topic or question, and it is at an individual or class level, and decide on using secondary data or gathering primary data. Now a little more conceptual here. Why statistics are awesome. Right? So we're going to devote a lot of time and attention to learning statistics. So it's important to realize why they're so great so we can enjoy devoting that time to them, right? So statistics are tools to understand the reality around us that we otherwise basically cannot see, right? So there's patterns and relationships all around us that many times we wonder about, but we can never really test. And statistics are one of the few means of actually testing if items are related, if variables and things are related to one another, right? And produce a valid answer. Right, so consider what I call the who's the boss syndrome. Okay, so the flaw in this sitcom, right? It was never revealed who the boss was, right? So it was a question. The title of the sitcom was an actual question: who's the boss? And for 8 years, every week it ran that question: who's the boss? Who's the boss? And it just went unaddressed. And even in the last show, it was never revealed. It was just an unanswered question that ran on and on and on, right? Now, you could consider there's critical research questions in practice, right? In any field that have the same pattern. There's critical research questions that run on, and they're never addressed. We just wonder, what the relationships are. So we need a cure for that syndrome, for the who's the boss syndrome, and statistics are one of those cures. For example, right, on the level of everyday life, you notice each time you compliment your spouse in the morning, he or she seems to clean the house by the end of the day. Right? So that's one of those things you wonder about. Does the one thing have anything to do with the other? So most of the time in life, we just wonder, and there's never a valid answer produced. But through statistics, being curious, you could count how often you compliment him or her and how often he or she cleans the house. Specifically, you could put it in a small table like this. Now we see the yes column in the center bolded reflects that 80% of the time the house was cleaned, a compliment was given. See to the left there, the yes, no. Compliment was given in the morning, right? And then below, only 5% of the time the house was cleaned, a compliment was given in the morning. So it seems like there is an association between cleaning the house and paying that compliment. Now we could very easily generalize that to the work level, right? So if you're a nurse and you have a patient and you would like the patient to take medications, you could notice the same thing. If you compliment the patient in the morning, are they more willing to take the medications, right? So you could count the same thing. Out of 100 days, how often do you pay a compliment and how often are medications taken? And you may see again in the center bolded column under yes, you see the same pattern, right? So 80% of the time the medication was taken, you would given a compliment, and only 5% of the time the medication was taken, you had not. Now you might say, these counts and percentages are somewhat clear and understandable. However, is that all that is needed to conduct a quantitative research study? And of course the answer is no. But then we might ask, well, what is needed to conduct an effective quantitative analysis research study? Do you need a super brain? No. Do you need to write all the information on your hand for a quick and constant reference? Thankfully, no. Should you hire the A-team? No, none of these are necessary. It's much more simple. What you need is what is presented in part 2 of our textbook, a model for conducting statistical research. So, a model is a conceptual representation of a process used to present an outcome. So almost anything you do in life that produces an outcome, you can model the elements that produce that outcome. The 7 steps of data analysis is a model for the process of producing a statistical analysis study, right? So it's used to produce an outcome known as an effective quantitative research study. And here's our model of the 7 steps of data analysis. 1, right, so we're going to go through these much more in depth, but 1, the study map. We just look at the relationships being examined. 2, data entry, where data are entered from surveys into a database. 3, checks of data integrity, where we examine if the data are appropriate for our study. 4, univariate analysis, where we look at each variable one at a time, at each characteristic. 5, bivariate analysis, where we look at significant one-on-one relationships between the variables and our outcome. Then 6, multivariate analysis, where we look at multiple predictors on our outcome. And then 7, the write-up and report. So this is going to become very lucid very quickly. Right? So, as I promised, right, we're going to relate what we're learning to something we already know. Right? So the model of data analysis can be likened to the process of dating, which we might call dating analysis. Right? So consider the process of dating on the TV show called The Bachelorette. Right? So we could parallel each step with that show with the steps of data analysis to make our point. All right, first of all, on that show, right, see on the right-hand side, right, what we're looking at, see all the arrows go to the Bachelorette. So we're looking for that strongest relationship between several bachelors 1 through 5 on the left, and how they relate to the Bachelorette. We're looking for the strongest relationship, right? That's the whole point of the show, right? So in data analysis, it's rather parallel, right? So instead of the Bachelorette, we're looking at our dependent variables such as happiness. And we're trying to see on the left, under data analysis, we're trying to see of all these factors in life, which has the strongest relationship per se with happiness. Does gender have the strongest impact on happiness? Does education level have the strongest impact? Just like in data analysis, we're looking at, does Bachelor 1 have the strongest relationship with the Bachelorette? Does Bachelor 2? Right, so let's take it a little more detailed, right? So the processes. What exactly is the process from beginning to end to determine that strongest relationship in each of the data and data analysis? So we know our goal is to find that strongest relationship, but how do we find it, right? So we're going to see each process has 7 similar steps. All right, Now, in the mapping of the relationships, all we're simply stating is, what the focus of our study is and what we're comparing to the focus of our study, right? For example, in our case with the data analysis on the right with the Bachelorette, right, all we're mapping out is that the focus is the Bachelorette, and we're looking at the relationship between Bachelor 1, and then the arrow goes to the Bachelorette, the relationship between Bachelor 1 and the Bachelorette. And then it goes on from there, Bachelor 2 to the Bachelorette, Bachelor 3, and so on. And then the same thing under data analysis in step 1, the study map, right? So we're looking at the relationship between gender, and the arrow goes to happiness, between gender and happiness. Next, education and happiness. So we're just looking at those relationships between each item on the left with the focal point on the right. Then step 2 is the entry of information, right? Now under data analysis, we have data entry. That's where you see each of the bachelors are standing in line at the computer, giving their data, their names, their interests, things like that for the show, right? And then on the left, under data analysis, we have data entry. And then you can see somebody's checking off, an item on a survey, right? So survey, excellent, good, fair, poor. So they fill out the items on the survey, and then those items are entered in the SPSS database. That's where that blue line is going to. That's what it looks like. Then 3, the checks of integrity. And you can imagine, just like in data analysis, they're very, very important, right? So in data analysis, the checks of data integrity might relate to just asking if any of the data seem a little suspicious, like our friend in the top hat. Then on the left, under data analysis, right, the checks of data integrity relate to something such as, are scores normally distributed? That's one of the common ones. We're going to go through that later. But we're just asking, are the data appropriate for our analysis? In the same way we might ask, are the daters, the bachelors, appropriate for dating? Right, now step 4, the uni level, uni meaning 1. Right, so under data analysis, you could say step 4 is uni data analysis, uni 1 data. So you're looking at the characteristics of one person at a time, such as Bachelor Bob. Right? So you just look at his characteristics. From Ohio, likes hiking, looking for the LTR, which I believe means a long-term relationship. Then on the left, under data analysis, step 4 is univariate. So instead of unidata, one data, univar, one variable. So also called descriptive analysis, because you're describing the characteristics of one variable at a time, the same way as a person, right? So looking at happiness, we might describe happiness by itself, measured from 1 to 5. The average score is 3.2, right in the middle. The highest and lowest scores for happiness are 2.0 to 4.0, right? Then the next step is step 5, the bi level. Bi meaning 2, right? So This is the round in data analysis in the bachelorette, where the mass of bachelors are eliminated, right? So specifically, this is where the bachelorette determines who and who she does not have a significant relationship with, right? So the ones she has a significant relationship with, she feels significantly towards, go on to the next round, and the ones who she doesn't have a significant relationship are eliminated in this round, right? So you can see in the red text, bachelors 3 and 5 did not have a significant relationship with the bachelorette, so they're eliminated. Bachelors 1, 2, and 3 do, so they're taken to the next round. Now in data analysis, this is very similar. So in bivariate analysis, we're determining which variables have a significant one-on-one relationship with a dependent variable, such as happiness, right? So you can see in the red text, gender and positive attitude did not have a significant relationship with happiness. So they're not taken forward to the next step of data analysis. Education level, income level, living with a dog and a cat do have a significant relationship with happiness, so they are taken to the next level. So that's quite similar. You could also call step 5 the bi level instead of BI. You could call it BYE, because in the case of the bachelorette, this is where the bachelorette says bye to most of the bachelors, right? They say bye and they're not taken to the next round. And that's the same thing with the data analysis. We say bye to the variables not significantly related to happiness, right? And they're not taken to the next round. Just a little mnemonic. Now, step 6, the multi-level, right? So in data analysis, we could call this on the right, step 6, multi-data analysis, right? So that's where the bachelorette considers of all the significant relationships, right? 1, 2, and 4, of all the bachelors she has a significant relationship with, who has the strongest relationship with her? And that's who she gives the rose, right? It's pretty much the same thing with data analysis. Step 6, multivariate analysis, examines of the variables that have significant one-on-one relationships with happiness, education level, income level, and positive attitude, which has the strongest impact upon happiness, right? So that's that strongest relationship between the dependent variable and the predictor. Just like you have the strongest relationship between the bachelorette and one of those bachelors. Then finally, step 7, the reporting of the results, right? So in data analysis, right, step 7 is the grand finale show. In data analysis, step 7 is the write-up and report, such as making a research report or reporting it in a peer-reviewed journal, right? So you can see, we could line them up side by side, data analysis and data analysis, right? Side by side, 7 steps, all pretty much parallel. So if you can understand the bachelorette show, you can understand data analysis. And as I said, this will be much clearer after we start implementing data analysis. But this is our foot on the step, right? Our first introduction to the concept. Now, you might consider and say, well, that's all fine and good, but why is a model for conducting statistical research really necessary, right? Well, we should make a few points about that. So there's sort of a missing link in statistics between learning statistical tests and actually producing a quantitative research study, right? Many people will take a class in statistics and it'll be fruitful and productive and informative, but then when they sit down to produce an actual quantitative research study, there's some kind of missing link where they can't actually do that. So this missing link relates to application, right? Or in other words, how to apply the knowledge to create that study. So a model, such as the 7 steps of data analysis, is that missing link, right? Between learning your statistical tests and being able to produce a quantitative research study, right? It organizes the information into steps to follow so you can implement them to produce a study. Also consider, when you're learning quantitative data analysis, you need to see the whole, right? Not just the parts. Now, seeing only parts of the process of quantitative data analysis is not meaningful. So if you ever heard that quantitative data analysis is confusing and frustrating, right? That's part of that experience, right? When you just learn one of the parts, it leads to confusion and frustration. So if we were to make a comparison, we would say trying to understand quantitative analysis when you've only seen a part is like trying to understand an orchestra, a whole, right, when you've only seen one instrument, such as a tuba, which is just a part of the orchestra. So let's parallel learning music with quantitative analysis, right? So suppose you've never seen an orchestra, which is the larger process of instruments working together, and you enroll in a music program. And the first class is on the tuba. So you look at this bighorn, you find it confusing. What's the meaning of this bighorn? What's the role of this bighorn? But if you've seen an orchestra and you see where the tuba fits in the orchestra, as in this photo, right, you may realize you're learning parts of a greater whole. And once you learn enough parts, you're going to understand that whole. Now, that's the same thing with learning quantitative data analysis, right? So if you enroll in a non-statistics program, you might have a requirement to learn quantitative data analysis. Say you've never seen the steps of data analysis, which is the larger process of the statistics working together, right? Now, your first class may be on the t-test, which is a bivariate test. Remember that one-on-one relationship, right? Now, that's very commonly taught as the first test you learn, and many times you just learn a couple of bivariate tests in your introductory statistics classes, right? So if you only learn the t-test, you may be confused regarding the meaning and role of that statistical test, just like the tuba. But if you see the overall process of data analysis, right, we know that the t-test fits into step 5, the bivariate test. You realize you're learning parts of the greater whole, and when you learn enough parts, you're going to understand the whole. Right? So understanding the overall process provides greater clarity, meaning, and understanding. Right? So the 7 steps of data analysis is a means to see that whole process of quantitative analysis. Now, it's important to realize to meaningfully grasp quantitative analysis, you need to know each step in detail within the model. Knowing less than these steps, right, is going to be incomplete knowledge, right, which is dangerous, right? So keep in mind, in quantitative analysis, one small mistake, right, something not considered or done incorrectly can lead to incorrect findings. Now, why that's such a threat is that an incomplete knowledge can still produce a study that looks complete, right? So you can't tell the difference between a study that's solid and not solid. So we need to make sure at our level that we're producing a solid study. So when it looks solid, it actually is solid. All right, lastly, our last point on why we need a model for conducting statistical research, right? All important processes have valid standards, right, that are agreed upon as steps to do that process. Okay, so consider surgery. The steps would include, if we broke it down to the very bare essentials, 1, the doctor washes his or her hands. 2, the patient gets anesthesia and is sedated. And 3, the surgical procedure is implemented. Right? So those are the steps of surgery per se. Now consider, what if the steps were followed out of order? Right? So here in our example, what if the doctor did the first step last. So the doctor just administered anesthesia. Number 2 was done first. Number 3, the surgical procedure was done, and then the doctor washed his or her hands, right? That should be the first step. That's wrong. So a governing body such as the American Medical Association, the AMA, would be called, right, to enforce the agreed upon standards. Also consider, what if one of the steps were just skipped altogether, right? So what if the doctor did the anesthesia and sedation number 2 and number 3, the procedure, and didn't wash his or her hands at all, right? So we all know these steps are followed as a matter of ethics, right? So there's agreed upon standards for this very important procedure, right? Agreed upon steps that must be followed. Now, quantitative research findings have a dramatic impact on the welfare of individuals and society, right? Almost every major decision these days are based upon the findings of quantitative research, right? So shouldn't there be an agreed upon list of necessary steps, which we call a model, to follow in quantitative research? Currently, there is not one, right? That's about as rhetorical as a question can be. Right? There should be probably an agreed upon list of necessary steps. Right? The steps would follow a model to make the findings more valid, comparable, and accurate. Right? How could one compare the results of studies if they're done differently? Right? If steps are adhered to in one study and not another. Right? So the 7 Steps of Data Analysis textbook presents the steps required to produce an effective and legitimate quantitative study. In other words, the materials present our model, our ordered number of steps reflecting the process of quantitative data analysis. Right? So we just reviewed part 1 of our textbook, the introduction, as well as part 2, the model for conducting statistical research. And now we're going to do a quick overview of parts 3 through 7 as we wrap up. So part 3 is going to introduce you to the data analysis concepts you need to know. So there are dozens, if not hundreds, of facts regarding the process of data analysis. You can't learn them all immediately, so you need to know the must-know concepts first. So say that's 20% of all those concepts, right? So that's what we're going to introduce first, those need-to-know concepts in part 3. In part 4, we're going to illustrate how to complete a quantitative research study with a continuous dependent variable, such as happiness measured on a scale of 1 to 5. All 7 steps will be followed, right? And this study will act as a template for when you need to conduct a study with a continuous dependent variable. You can just plug in yours and follow along. Now, paralleling that, part 5 will tell us how to complete a quantitative study with a categorical, right? It's going to be happy, yes, no, in categories, a categorical dependent variable, where again, all 7 steps will be applied, and this will be your template when you need to complete a study that has a categorical, known as dichotomous, such as yes, no, dependent variable. Then 6, we're going to discuss how to assess a published quantitative research study. So if you've ever had the experience of reading a research study and somebody asks you about the quality of it, you know, and you're not sure, this is going to put you on solid ground, right? So we're going to describe how to judge the quality of that published quantitative research study. Now the key will be knowing what to look for before you read the study. That way you can see if something's missing and if all that needs to be there is there. Right? So this will also help you rigorously assess your own work. Then part 7 will be the conclusion, right? So we're going to broach several topics important to quantitative research, such as how an agreed upon model of statistical research impact the field. What are the possible future directions of quantitative analysis, right? All right. So next class, we're going to address part 3, the data analysis concepts you need to know, and make final decisions regarding your quantitative research study, as well as implement step 1, the study map, to illustrate your study topic and research question. All right, so there we are. That's next week. We'll be at the study map level of our 7 steps. And thank you for watching the presentation. I'll see you next week.